Welcome to Season 5 of How I Made It Through, and thank you for joining us. I have invited Ray Catania, author, metaphysical teacher, and coach, to join me as my co-host as we aim to engage, challenge, inspire, and teach you, our listeners, what it really means to be a spiritual being having a human experience. We'll explore not just concepts, but attempt to unravel the neuroscience of metaphysics, as well as practices designed to expand consciousness, increase healing, and develop a profound connection to love. We'll explore God, death, the afterlife, and pushing past limitations as we encourage you to break free of the trance of fear so that you may experience greater freedom, peace, and connection to yourselves, each other, and spirit. Welcome to the show, How I Made It Through. Guest today, Melinda Peterson. Yeah, she's done amazing things.
Yeah, she's really something else. But some of the trauma she's endured that we're going to hear about is pretty heavy duty,
Mm-hmm.
near death
Yeah.
experience at the same time as losing a pregnancy.
Oh my God. I
Brutal.
know. Totally brutal. And yet, if we're looking at contracts and reasons and looking at things from a spiritual perspective,
Hmm.
it sounds like it illuminated her path. Yeah,
Yeah.
so health intuitive, registered nurse. I'm going to read all of this when she gets here, but there's a lot going on here. And Bernadette Thompson, who we had on the show,
Hmm.
they're closely connected. Bernadette was the one who introduced me, and they're both going to be speaking together at IANDS in August, late
Oh,
August.
really? And this is the first year
Hmm.
I'm not going.
And the
Oh,
first year you're not going. How many years
too
have you
bad.
gone?
Well, I've been with IANDS for a long time. Last year in DC, and I had before that had a class that was on their website. You could like log in and take classes from different people that you chose, and I did. I think I had a monthly class for about 6 months with them. So I've been speaking with they really have been with me since the beginning. They
Oh, I
really
didn't
helped me out
realize
a
that.
lot.
Okay,
Yeah,
International Association of Near-Death Studies, just so people are aware what IANDS is if
yeah.
they've never heard of
And
IANDS.
it's a great organization, not just because, the way I feel about them, but, if you've experienced an NDE and you're looking for other people who have done so and you wanna compare notes, because that was the thing for me when I was young and I had my NDE, I didn't have anybody to go to. We didn't have an internet yet, so there was nowhere for me to go.
Yeah.
But here's this group of people, like in the thousands now, I believe, in their membership, and they have all either experienced it from a first perspective or a second or what have you. And
Mhm.
it's so refreshing to be able to talk to somebody about that and they get it and they don't look at you like you have three heads.
Exactly, exactly.
I mean, I was at a point where I was accepting what had happened already, but to find them, it was just like, wow, there's thousands of others of us out there.
Yes. Who need that connection.
Hey, Melinda's here.
Melinda's
Hello.
here.
Hi.
Hi. I like the curly hair. You're a
Thank
woman of many looks.
I am. Yes, that is something I mentioned actually that I can shapeshift in this physical reality. I have straight hair. I have curly hair, and people don't recognize. Even my daughter says, "Who's that?"
Isn't
Oh
that
yeah.
funny? Yeah, yeah, yeah. My hair's not as curly as yours, but it is also curly. So it's like, okay, what look are we going for today?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's nice to meet you.
It's nice to meet you too, Kristin and Ray. Thank you so much for having me on. And I just adore Bernadette, who made this connection. And I knew when she said, I will be making this connection, that I had to come on. So I appreciate you welcoming me into your community and your space today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
The honor is all ours. And she is a new friend, but feels like just such a soul friend. So it means so much that she made the introduction. And she had such wonderful things to say about you. So we really appreciate it. And you have quite a story. So let me put my big old glasses on and I'll read your intro and then we'll get started. Melinda Peterson is a health intuitive, registered nurse, motivational speaker, yoga teacher, energy healer, lost mama, and near-death experiencer. Friends describe her as a mixture of Deepak Chopra and Jennifer Garner. Melinda created Scarlet Center after receiving a vision in a near-death experience that showed her wisdom is in the body, expressed as interconnected divine guidance from our body's systems. It is through this wisdom we access the most out of this life experience. Scarlet is a global movement helping people build luminous and healthy lives through reconnecting to their bodies inner wisdom, and seasonal rhythms. It's really interesting. Melinda has worked with, it's all interesting. Melinda has worked with nonprofits, small businesses, and has helped people around the world. Prior to her near death experience, she worked as an environmental scientist. Melinda is a mom of a curious daughter, son in spirit, playful dog, and creative husband. She lives in Fort Collins, Colorado. That's quite a bio.
Wow.
Well,
Welcome to the show.
well, thank you. It is quite a bio, but I look at it like it's just the life experience, right? And
Mhm.
we all have these stories that intermingle and weave in and out of different experiences, and we gain access to information in the best that we can because it's so fun to learn, right? And the more that I get to know people in the interconnected way that I get to do this work, which is such a privilege, the more I recognize that this is all in all of us, right? And that we have these desires to move through this human experience in all sorts of different ways. And you don't have to have a near death experience to do that. I did, but yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Well, you did, and that feels like, correct me if I'm wrong, that might be a good place to start. And your near death experience, when Ray and I were just commenting, also came with the loss of a child.
yeah. So when I was little, when I was a kiddo, I remember just really being fascinated with my body, like as particularly with my hands, because I could carry books and stuffed animals and all the things that I loved. And then as I got older and started to go through the process of being integrated in society and finding out that, especially as a woman and a woman of color, being told that our body's supposed to look a certain way, our body's supposed to act a certain way, we're supposed to have this ideal situation that we're supposed to fit into. And what happened through that process is I started becoming more and more disconnected to my body. And it wasn't until I became pregnant that I started noticing, like, oh, I have to be more integrated in my body. But I still looked at it as like a very structural way, right? Going to the doctor, doing all the things that you're supposed to do, and experiencing the joy in the way that you can. But it felt more like a job, really, than something I could settle into and enjoy.
Mm.
Then at 25 weeks, I had what was internal bleeding, and I wasn't aware of that until I was very, very sick and heading to the hospital. My son had at that point had already passed,
Mm.
and I was not aware of that because I was in a critical state myself. And when I came to the hospital, they had to do a fluid resuscitation, and I had 64 units of blood product given to my body.
Wow.
While all that was happening on the ground, I had my near death experience. And what happened was there were a multiple number of spiritual guides in my near death experience. And some of them I had actually not known on this life, but I recognized them and they were very familiar to me. But particularly my dad's side of the family had a lot of health crises and they had a lot of health situations. And I knew that this spiritual being was from that generation. And the spiritual being really told me, amongst many beautiful things that I received in the near death experience, told me the wisdom is in your body and you're going to go back now. And when you go back to your body, you need to express this information to everybody else and tell them about what you've learned. And now at the time, like I was working as an environmental science and I didn't really understand exactly what this meant. But when I started coming back to my body, and it was sort of like I was also in a coma. So it was sort of like I was kind of like coming back and then I'd be back in my near death experience and then I'd come back. And though I did not have a choice, of course, separating with my son, that part of it was a challenge. And yet I knew that he was going to this immense, immense love. I came back into my body that wasn't working the way I remembered it working. My hands, the very hands that were doing all the fun things for me and getting me through this life and being able to access books and all the things that they can do were paralyzed. And I had a tube in my throat and so I had to relearn and rebirth through my body. And that's when I knew, okay, this is what the spirit guide was trying to tell me. And this is
Yeah.
what my process is now. And so what I did was I became a nurse because I wanted the medical understanding, but I knew that there was so much more to it. And being a nurse has taught me so much too about our bodies, but the spirituality side is like it has to be integrated. And so that is my goal in this life from now on.
Wow. Wow. I'm just curious, when you're in the coma and you have the near-death experience, are you seeing things or is it just like a connection to the being? Did you see the being or was it just sort of auditory or sentient or cognizant, I should say?
Sure. Yeah. So the first moment when I really realized something different was happening and that I was not of my body, I'm living in it right now, but I am not of the body, was when this was happening to my body, everything went dark. And then I heard a voice that sounded like me, but it wasn't quite me. And the voice said, "Did I just die?" And at that point I knew there was a separation happening here. There was something bigger happening here. And I was just thrust into this immense amount of love. And it just was so, it's really, anybody who's been through a near death experience, you all know, right? It's incredibly difficult to describe in our language. But also in my experience, particularly, I was also surrounded by these light beings. And there were all sorts of colors, primarily purple. And the purple were the ones that were kind of like outlines that I knew, oh, yes, you're a familiar spirit to me. You're a familiar spirit to me. And they just kept reminding me, you're safe, you're loved. This is going to continue. I was moving in toward this light experience, feeling the love. And because I was in this blissful experience as well, I started to notice I no longer felt pain. I no longer felt cold. And there were so many things that were happening to my body, right? And those layers were just being shut away and I was being thrust into this love experience. And there was a point too as well that my son came into it. And that was such a beautiful transformation for me because when I came back to my human experience, I had to go through grief. I had
Yeah.
to.
Yeah.
Like
So
there was no
you
choice, no
just
matter
knew it
how.
was him?
Yeah.
You just knew. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, so I was able to gain that knowledge that he's on the other side, but I had to grieve. I'm a human. I'm having the human experience, and that's why there's so many parts of these emotional things that we feel that make us just be human and bring us more joy in this life experience when they're worked through.
I'd love to stay there. I work as a coach and I help people with emotional regulation. And sometimes I work with people who are on the spiritual path and they will even speak to, especially if they really have spent years studying different states of meditation and altered consciousness, of bypassing emotion. And so a lot of my work is around the importance of emotion. What can you share about why we have these emotions and how to be in relationship to them?
Mhm. So because our body, mind, and spirit are all one, especially in this human experience, we have systems, right, that work together. And how we generally regulate them or figure them out and work with them currently now is by looking at the data that's expressed. Particularly as a nurse, we look at heart rate, we look at blood pressure, we look at all the inputs, outputs of the body, right? And those things are all very important. Emotional inputs are also important as well. Emotional data has to be understood if we're really going to start to make ourselves well. And this is something that in our cellular DNA, we carry these emotions. We carry different emotions in different parts of the body. We know this. This is not rocket science. We know our chest is tightening when we feel fear. We know our stomach gets upset when we feel anxiety. Like it's not rocket science. And so if you throw a number of other maybe medical situations on top of it and you're not working with those emotions, you can heal the body, but it's not going to necessarily heal. It's only a bandage on the wound, right? Mhm.
Mhm.
People with PTSD, myself included, for a while, it lives in your nervous system, and you can actually do damage to your body because it's in your nervous system, right? It
Mhm.
can start to cause things like arthritis and other things. And like Melinda just said, you have to cure the problem, but then you have to cure the real problem, which is the problem behind the problem. Otherwise, it's going to come back and over again. So, what do you recommend how can we do that? What's the first step in that?
Yeah. So, Ray, that's a great question. You cannot do this alone, right? We have to reflect within each other because we all have a similar issue. We can all see each other in ourselves, and we're all at different points in our journey as well. And so I think the first step is to just understand where these emotions are showing up in your body, and how you can start to just understand, are they mine, and are they coming from society, are they coming from a trauma? There's so many things that we cannot rationalize or understand or express
Yeah.
that are contained in ourselves, and so it's helpful to have somebody reflect that for you, because we're all meant to be here for each other.
Yeah,
Well,
find a way to address it. Don't just stop when you've healed the physical aspect.
Right.
Find somebody to help you with the other aspect.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and hopefully, I mean, I don't know if this will happen in my lifetime, but we're getting there. Ideally, it'll be all at once, right? Our hospitals will look a lot different.
I hope so too. I hope so too. And so someone comes to you, you're a medical intuitive, you also are an RN. Help our listeners understand, what can they expect? Is something you can share in terms of sort of the protocol, or what a session with you might look like?
Yeah, absolutely. Generally, people come to me with, I have XYZ health issue. Can you help me through this?
Yeah.
And that's like, what that is just a calling, right? It's a calling to know. It's a calling to reconnect. It's a calling to reconnect to the body. And so, what's nice about seeing somebody who's a nurse as well as a health intuitive is, right, I can kind of look at some of those data points as well as like bring in the spiritual aspect. But what I like to do when I first start out with somebody is to really connect through mediumship, clairaudience, claircognizant, and try to understand what it is the body is trying to tell us, because
Yes.
infused in us, because we are of the spirit and we are also of the other side, but we're here living in this body, are our spirit guides. And they're in our cells, right? They're in our DNA, and they are here to help us. And so I just help guide and listen and hear what they have to say. And those things that come up sometimes can be surprising, right? If somebody's having digestive issues, maybe the blood storyteller will come through and say, actually, there's an anemia problem here that needs to be addressed first, right? And so it's really just, that's something that you wouldn't get, right, in a hospital or
No, you would not.
Definitely not.
medical setting.
And if you
No.
requested it, they would ship you off to another hospital.
Exactly.
Exactly. So that is a great
So true,
segue
right?
to, how do you live in both worlds? Given that I'm sure you've had, my assumption would be some people would be like, well, this is woo woo, or how do you hold both worlds?
Such a great question, Kristen. And I'm trying to figure it out myself, quite
I,
honestly.
I believe it. Yeah.
What I will say is, like, getting back to the grief, right? That's an experience, right, that I know well, obviously being a lost mother. And other people come to me as well who've had losses, or particularly pregnancies, just because they know my story. There was a moment when, in my near death experience, when I knew I was going back to my body and I had to say goodbye to my son. And I knew I was sending him back to this incredible love experience, and I knew he would be okay. And obviously, I knew I was going to be experiencing the grief on the other side. But at this point, it was magical. And what happened was, he was thrust into my heart in like a hammock, right? So he actually lives, his little spirit lives in a hammock in my heart. And so I knew, like, what, at the actual time when that was happening, my blood product actually started to work, and I started to get some of my function back. And I know, that this is accessible for others, and it's so powerful that, and they don't have to necessarily have a near death experience to get that, right? But I know that through meditation that could be possible, or through other means that could be possible. And it's so strong within me that I just have no choice but to
Mhm.
keep moving forward. And when I'm in a medical setting, if somebody asks me questions or there's a door open and they have consent, I will do a quick Reiki session for them. And things that are within my scope and the like more medical side of my work, I want to keep that envelope flowing because I know the power of the healing that's possible
Yeah.
Mm.
and necessary. Because if you're sitting in that hospital bed and you've just gone through a pregnancy loss, you you need it.
You
You
need
need
it.
Need
somebody
it.
to walk you through that.
Yeah. You need it so badly. You need it so badly. So I have a couple of my brother and my closest friend are just really, really sick and struggling with chronic illness and feeling really, really frustrated with the state of healthcare in the US and being tossed about and just the enormous amount of bureaucracy and paperwork and that feels like it just compounds the illness because now they're stressed and feeling unseen and unheard and disregarded and being told sometimes that they're lying.
Yes.
I'm hearing both that you can connect with their guides, but they have a capacity. And is that something that you teach how they can connect with their guides? Or if someone is in a state like that, I know again, everything is specific, but I hold them in my heart. And so when I'm talking with someone like you, it's hard not to say, I love these people and they're suffering. What insight or avenue or what do they do? Big old question. It's
Good
okay
question,
to say that's
Kristen.
too much. That's too
Yes.
much. Yeah.
No, no, no. And I feel their pain definitely. The pandemic, I think, was a disruptor to make things worse before they get better.
Right.
And unfortunately, there are many people that are trying to break through this system that is not improving. It's getting worse.
Yeah.
And so I encourage, yes, of course, to learn these techniques for themselves, to integrate in their own way, to work and heal some of these things that are making their chronic disease more challenging that cannot be seen in a hospital or medical environment. And because anything that we can do while the system is breaking down to come back together better and stronger, which is, I know, is part of this large awakening that we're going through.
Mhm.
But anything that we can do to help people, not only ourselves, but help them start to integrate it in their own way is going to be incredibly useful. So, yeah. And it's like you just want somebody to just hold your hand and say, I hear you and I see you, and if one of us in the medical setting, right, could do that for just and it for just one moment,
Yes.
right, that healing power of love
Yes.
can help us start to work through these things.
Before we
Yes.
had a machine that was telling us all the data about the patient, we had to use intuitive abilities. We had to tune
Absolutely.
into that. So we were forced to do it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's that vibration of love. I mean,
Mhm.
what we're really talking about is bringing love in and being so present with another human being. In the meantime, I feel like so many canaries in the coal mine are saying this is toxic, whether it's the environment or social media or the fact that we are so divorced from our spiritual and embodied wisdom. What do you say to people who talk about soul's contracts? Like, well, maybe that's a karmic thing, or you want to heal, and yet maybe they're here to learn about being ill, or how do you attempt to unravel that complexity?
Oof, it's a good complexity. We're all gonna die,
Mhm.
right? Some of us again.
Mhm.
We have a system right now that tells us we're trying to fight death
All the time.
all the time. And these soul contracts that come within us or come to us and we all have like situations like mine, right, where I'm severely sick, less than a 1% chance to survive.
Wow.
And you know yes, I came out of it and I'm grateful to the medical science for helping me through that, but I also know more than that. It's gonna like we're all gonna have things in our life, right? And eventually we are gonna die, and we can even be well as we're going through a dying process.
Mm.
Mm.
So I think it's like the idea of what health needs to look like at certain points in our life, and how we can manage things from day to day if these things do show up if it's part of our soul contract and these things do show up, but how can we be more well with it? How can we live with it
Yeah.
instead of trying to fight it? Because that fighting energy is just keeping us stuck, right?
Yeah.
And how do we love that part of ourselves? And it's not easy. It's not easy because we do want to be here. We do want to enjoy life. Nature is beautiful. Families are beautiful. Like all these things that we have around us that we get to enjoy. Like it is a wonderful life, right? And we want to live as well as we can in it and do as well with this human experience as we can. And we know we're going to die.
Yeah. Well,
And
what
the years, we kind of have that competitive edge, right? We know we've been there, we've seen it, so we can like our relationship with death changes. We don't fear it as much as others who've never seen it. And I was an atheist, you were a scientist. Neither one of us believed that there was anything else, right?
Right.
So, and then
Exactly.
all of a sudden, here it is, right in our faces. Oh my
Yep.
God! And you're speaking at IANDS. Speaking to other people, you're speaking at IANDS, and can you tell us a little bit about that this year?
Sure. This year in Phoenix, Arizona, and at the end of August, I will be speaking at IANDS. I am leading a panel that is just incredible. So I'm a near-death experiencer. The other two are spiritual transformative experiencers. And at first, we were kind of going, how do we connect all this together? But the amount of weaving in between our stories is just like mind bending. And what we came to know is that each of us have accessed gifts in all of our experiences. And that is the thread among us. And we now work with these gifts through these often challenging experiences of transformation. And so I'm so fortunate because I'm going to be on a panel with Bernadette Thompson, who's an intuitive spiritual guide or spiritual and coaching guide. And then I'm going to also be with Rebecca Castle, who's an energy healer and angel interpreter. And I'm a health intuitive. And so each of us have, it's almost like different layers of one lifetime. Bernadette works with generational and ancestors, and I work with the body now, very present in our body now. And Rebecca works with angels. And so it's going to be such a powerful panel because not only will we be talking about how these experiences open the gifts within us, we're going to be helping people access their own gifts from themselves and allowing them and cheering them on to bring them to being no matter what their story is, because that is what
Amazing.
this awakening and love and hope is
It's like
all about.
a perfectly rounded panel, right? It's like
Yes.
it's going to be good. I'm going to tune in. I can't get there this year, but I will watch you online for sure. Can
Well,
you tell
thank
us
you.
about the Scarlet Center a little bit?
Sure,
You can-
yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. So Scarlet Center came from scar consciousness. And what that means is basically recognizing the wounding and then the healing that comes from that. And actually taking that literal physical process and looking at that as far as like how we heal scars and what that can mean actually for our journeys. And we we work with all sorts of people, nonprofits. Like I've worked with a pregnancy loss nonprofit, particularly to bring more connection back to our bodies so that we can live a more enjoyable life. And that's through readings. That's through sometimes it's through like they're going through some kind of a medical, like a surgery or something, and it's preparing the mind and the body and the spirit for that so that they can have the best outcome for them. So we do a number of different things, and I'm also, since I am a yoga teacher at IANDS, I will be in the healing room doing some poses to kind of work through that conference body where we all kind of sit a lot, stand a lot, and what will happen when we work through some of these poses is the body guides will start to talk to me. And so I will read those as well and give them an update as far as what they're telling me. And so Scarlet is evolving, and it's been such a privilege and joy to have it. And yeah, anybody who's interested can get access to my website or find me on Instagram. And I'm sure you're putting all that in the notes. But
We'll
uh,
speak to it as well. What
oh,
is your website? Yeah, please share.
yeah, so it's scarletcenter.com, SCARLIT is how you spell Scarlet. And then I'm on Instagram as In Tune with Melinda. And on my Instagram, I talk a little bit more about how our guides give us some seasonal wisdom as well. So Yeah.
Seasonal wisdom. My God. Okay, there we go. Thank you, Courtney. Thank you, Courtney. We haven't even gotten to seasonal wisdom because I was reading your bio. Before we go, can you explain a little bit about what that means, if that's even possible?
Yeah. So we are seasonal beings and our cravings change, our movement changes, our how we interact with others changes. But what we also have is like the seasonal changes, right? Like even right now in the summer, we're starting to get into peach season or watermelon seasons. We start to crave these things because we need more hydration, right? And so it's really just living more with that as opposed to living with the same all year long and accessing our spiritual wisdom. And also, like, our guides, like, make little tweaks among different seasons too, depending on what's happening in the collective. So it's a new way of living. And that's just something else I like to do and inform people about. And on my website, there is the Feel Better calendar you can download for free. Just put in
This
your
is in
email.
your spare time, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Because we know you have so much spare time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, as we go into transitioning to ending this episode with you, say a little bit about what it means to you to live a full and spiritual life.
Yeah. Living a full and spiritual life. It's really accessing the awe, accessing the incredible parts of ourselves every day as if they're just awakening to ourselves all over again, right? And wanting to do that with love, right? It's really learning that and coming back to that love for yourself, coming back to that awe for yourself. And whatever kind of information comes with it comes to you, or things that you have to relearn about yourself, you do it with a curiosity and you do it with a loving curiosity. And I think that that's for me, that's what I try to do is be curious. Like, what is today, Shelley, for me? And how can I love myself through it?
Mm, that's so good. That is so, so good. Thank you for your valuable time and your wisdom and your love. It lights me up, and I'm sure many will feel the same. Really appreciate you.
Thank you, Melinda.
I appreciate you. Thank you so much for the work that you do as well, Kristin.
How I Made It Through is produced and distributed by EIQ Media, LLC. Elevate your emotional IQ with podcasts and content focused on overcoming adversity, leadership, mental health, entrepreneurship, spiritually transformative experiences, and more.